My music career wasn't where I wanted it to be, and I got kind of depressed by that. I think partly I was afraid that somebody would hear it and think,
Hrishikesh Hirway.
The famous, the infamous
Hrishikesh Hirway.
musician, producer, and an award-winning podcast host.
From Song Exploder.
It was like the gods were trying to send you a signal, like a message. There is something you will do in addition to music that will really have a huge impact.
I wasn't sure if I knew how to write a song still. I thought, well, maybe this is a time for me to try some other things. Stop being so single-minded about my music career.
Hibernation is not the absence of learning. You are absorbing information and growing.
It's hard to distinguish hibernation from death when you're in it.
Your mom passed away in 2020. You had a dream where you saw her, and that dream...
It wasn't just a dream. It was a memory that I had countless times. I remember waking up from that dream and thinking...
So much to talk about. I want to start by asking you about where, sort of growing up. I know a little bit about you from following you on Instagram, seeing pictures of your dad at a food factory at the University of Oregon, and reading about things that you've written about your mom and her recipes and her struggles towards the end of her life, which we'll get to. Well, let's start with growing up. You're both your parents are immigrants, mm-hmm. and they somehow ended up in the suburbs outside of Boston, where you grew up.
Yeah. My dad came to the U.S. In 1968 to study food science. And originally he was at the University of Oregon. And then he ended up transferring to the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And that's where he was living when my sister was born. He and my mom got married in 1970. And then they after he finished school, they moved outside of Boston, and I was born in a town called Malden that was just outside Boston. And then I grew up in a suburb called Peabody, about 25 minutes north of Boston.
And he, from what I understand, like he worked for it was a food scientist for a bigger company where he would like develop flavors and recipes.
Yeah, that came later in his career. When I was growing up, he was working more on the sort of like food safety side of things for a company called KM that was based in Boston, in Chelsea, Mass. He worked there for most of my childhood. And then later, he ended up going to a company in Nebraska, and then he spent the last part of his career working for Griffith Foods, or Griffith Laboratories outside of Chicago. And that's where he was doing a lot of this sort of new product development. And that, I think, was the most fun part of his career for him.
And your mom worked at Sears.
Yeah. She worked at Sears while I grew up for most of my childhood. And then she took another job at Filene's, which was also in the same mall where the Sears was.
Tell me a little bit about your, sort of like culturally growing up, because your parents are immigrants. Mm-hmm. And did they do everything they could to kind of preserve their culture so you and your sister would understand it as you were growing up?
I think they tried to. It was very important for them that we felt some connection to it. One of the things I remember early on was growing up reading about Hinduism, reading the stories, of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, those sort of important texts from Hinduism in comic book form. There was this line of comic books that would tell these stories, and I loved those. That was my I ended up becoming a big comic book fan. But my first comics were these Amar Chitrakatha comic books. That was the line, and they would do all these stories from Hindu mythology, and my parents knew I loved those, and they would always get them for me or have relatives bring them over from India. But, through food and just family getting together and any kind of cultural event that we could go to, they always brought us to, my sister and me.
What about music? What do you remember them playing at the house?
Every Sunday there was a program on the radio, on AM radio, that they would play Indian music for 2 hours. And there was a friend, sort of a friend of the community, who had a radio show. His name was Harish Dang. And he was kind of famous to me because I would hear his voice every week introducing songs, and he would play old songs and new songs, all sort of Bollywood songs. And it was, I think, the one time that you could actually hear something live. You could hear like live broadcast Indian music in Massachusetts. And every Sunday when that program would be on, my parents would play it. Whatever chores we were doing around the house or something like that, they'd have it loud enough so that we could hear it, from every room. And outside of that, when that show wasn't on, we would still listen to a lot of Indian music. They had a lot of dubs. We'd have a lot of cassettes that were dubbed from, I don't even know what they were like. They were sort of, I don't know, mixtapes of different composers or different singers. So it would be a 60-minute tape of all Lata Mangeshkar songs, or a 60-minute tape of all songs that were composed by O.P. Nair or something like that. And I don't really know what their favorites were, other than they would just always be playing them. And every time we would go to an Indian grocery store, there were a couple of Indian groceries that opened up, maybe like 30 minutes away from our house, and we would make pilgrimages to go there to get spices for my mom's cooking and ingredients. There would be the special kind of the special kind of chili that she uses, the special spinach that was the best for whatever she wanted to make. But these grocery stores would also sell cassette tapes, and you could rent VHS tapes too.
Yeah.
So they would rent a couple of Indian movies one Sunday, and then the following Sunday, they'd return them and take out 2 more. And so that's how we used to watch Bollywood movies and listen to music.
The famous playback singers.
Yeah. It was.
I think. Sorry, you were going to say?
No. Go ahead.
You mentioned Lata Mangeshkar, who passed away, I think, this in 2022.
Yeah,
and probably one of the most best-selling artists in human history. I think.
Yeah. At one point, she held the Guinness Book of World Records for the most songs ever recorded.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did that music resonate with you as a kid when you heard her, or whoever was being Asha Bhosle, and I remember for the first time ever hearing Asha Bhosle in the song "Brimful of Asha" in 1995 when that came out by Corner Shop, and I said, "Who is this? What are they singing about?" And that was what led me to listen to her work. As a kid, did you like that music? Did it resonate with you?
Yeah, I loved that music. I mean, I think I was young enough that I kind of I listened to whatever anybody would play, but I definitely had my favorites, and Asha Bhosle was one of them. But the stuff that I really loved, there were great songs from the 80s, from that era of movies, and we would watch those movies with Amitabh Bachchan, like the Bollywood action movies. I loved all of that stuff, but for anybody who has never seen a Bollywood movie, it doesn't matter what genre. It doesn't matter if it's an action movie or not. They all have songs. They all have song and dance numbers. And I loved a lot of that music, but I remember feeling particularly moved by the older stuff. Songs from movies that I hadn't seen. They were from sort of older black and white films from the late 50s and the 60s. There were a couple of those cassette tapes that my mom and dad would play that I really loved. I don't know what my, so, they were in Hindi and I didn't speak Hindi. But just the sound of the music, the melodies, but also like the sound of the old recording, also filled me with a feeling, that I loved. I was, I think, trying to understand what nostalgia was. I hadn't heard that word, but I think it was filling me with something akin to nostalgia for the first time, where I was like, my heart aches listening to this music. And I feel happy, but I feel sad. And it makes me think of some now forgotten time, some time from before I was born. But I loved that so much. And so there were a couple of tapes that I would always request, when we'd be on a long car ride or something like that. I would always ask my parents, would you put this one on? Or could we make sure we brought this one with us?
Did either of your parents play instruments?
No. No, my mom was a great singer, but not with any kind of training or anything like that. She was really, just sort of, she could sing along to the songs on the radio, and mostly I would hear her just sort of singing songs to herself in the house as she was doing whatever. And my dad has no musical ability.
When a lot of kids are forced to learn an instrument, mine included, at a young age, and then they drop it, and you started piano at a really early age, but you didn't. I mean, the instruments resonated with, you were drawn to them.
Yeah. We had a couple of family friends who had pianos, and I think my parents noticed me, sitting down at the piano, and just I would play around. And I think at one point I figured out how to play some, song that we'd been listening to. I played the melody on the piano. And I think that gave them the idea that they're like, you should do this. You should learn how to do this. But I was interested anyway. Like I liked sitting down at our friends' pianos. So when they suggested that I take piano lessons, it didn't come out of the blue, and it felt really exciting to me.
Were you the kind of kid, by the time you hit your early teens, that was just on a piano, like composing your own stuff, or were you sort of, fastidiously practicing the pieces that you had to master?
I wasn't really fastidious about anything as a teenager. I really loved playing music, but I was a really bad piano student. I never wanted to practice the pieces that I was supposed to learn. I just wanted to sit at the piano and make stuff up. It wasn't even that I was writing songs. I just liked, putting my hands down and seeing what came out. And I could do that for a really long time. But then eventually I'd have to switch from that mode to, okay, let me pull out the book and figure out, okay, I got to practice it. And my heart would sink when I would switch from the kind of improv mode to let me actually play what I'm supposed to play mode.
I feel like sort of age 14 to 16 is a really pivotal time for a lot of kids, because that's when they start to discover, maybe more interesting music. They might sort of move on from top 40, or they might continue to listen to top 40, but start to discover other interesting music. What did you start to listen to? I mean, what were you listening to when you were like 14, 15, 16?
Well, that was definitely a pivotal time for me, not just in terms of music, but in all things, but music for sure. That was the time when I also started learning how to play the drums. My piano teacher in high school was friends with the drum teacher, and even though I wasn't taking drum lessons, I asked if he would talk to the drum teacher and see if I could get access to the drum set, the school drum set. And he did, and he got me a key so I could go in there and practice when no one else was using it. And so at that time, I started trying to teach myself how to play the drums by playing along to tapes. I would go in with a Walkman, and I remember I had a tape that had 13 songs by Fugazi on it, and I would sit there and try and play along to that on the drums, and that's basically how I learned how to play the drums.
Waiting room. You could definitely play that on the drums.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how well
Yeah.
I could play it, but it was something to practice, and it was something to sort of aim for. So that was really fun. That was when I started to, before that in middle school, I had listened to, stuff that was on the radio for sure. I mean, top 40, but stuff that felt edgy on the top 40. Like I really was into like Public Enemy and Ice-T, and on the other side of it, like Metallica, and Nirvana was really exciting for me when that hit the top 40. So when I got to high school, I was trying to find, what was the next layer after that music. So Fugazi came out of that, and Minor Threat, and I started to listen to more punk and post-punk stuff.
Would you describe yourself in high school as a charismatic kid, a quiet kid, maybe bits of both?
I got made fun of a lot as a freshman by the older kids. I think because I was maybe too earnest. Like I didn't have a cool, cynical outlook, and so I think I seemed kind of dorky, or not seemed. I was, kind of dorky and maybe goofy, and yeah. So it's hard to say that. It's hard to imagine that anybody really considered me charismatic, because I think I was just like a dorky kid. Also, I was a year younger than everybody. So my freshman year of high school, I was 13. So I think I just seemed like a little bit of a dork.
Yeah.
But by the time I finished high school, I feel like I found some kind of identity, some kind of place for myself. Especially from like playing drums and being in a band, and also just, by the time you're a senior, there are no other older kids left to make fun of you.
Right.
So
yeah,
that
and also
worked out.
being earnest was like quite possibly the worst sin you could commit as a Gen Xer.
Yeah. It was
like, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I didn't have the best experience at first in high school. I ended up coming to really love it, but in the beginning, it's not like I was really bullied, but other kids would make fun of me either behind my back or to my face, I definitely still hear the ghosts of some of those insults now. Like I still think about some of that stuff.
You went on to study art at Yale, and from everything I've read, your parents, I mean, and I've heard versions of this story many dozens of times with other children of immigrants. I'm a child of immigrants, where you hear the first generation person you're interviewing say, my parents want to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yeah.
And I've read the same about you, that you've said that was their kind of hope, that you would pursue a profession like that, because that is a great, stable, secure life. You did not pursue that. You went to study art at one of the best universities in the world. So how did they respond when you said, yeah, I think I want to study art?
Yeah, I feel like, in fact, it might even be too mild to put it as it was a hope for them that I would be either an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor. It was just sort of the only imaginable possibility. It was just sort of, which of these, there are only 3 doors, which door are you going to go through? And so when I was like, oh, actually, I found this weird cubbyhole that actually turns out to be my own door, they were I think they were just scared more than anything else. I think by the time I'd gotten to college, they knew me well enough, and I had sort of proven over and over again that I kind of wasn't going to do the thing that they wanted me to do just because they said they wanted me to do it. I think to their frustration, but I think they'd given up in a lot of ways on trying to convince me to do the thing that they wanted me to do. So when I told them I was going to be an art major, I think they maybe threw their hands up in the air a little bit, but they were kind of used to it. But again, mostly they were scared. They were just like, "What does that mean? And how will you make a living from that?" And I explained to them that I loved graphic design and that I was taking graphic design classes, and that I had actually already gotten like a freelance job making a website for a local company in New Haven. And so I was like, here's me using my art education and working already. And I think they were like, okay. Well, they understood that. They were like, okay, so it's something that you do with computers and you're making money. That's close enough to some kind of like software engineer or IT or something, right, that they could kind of swallow that pill and kind of muster on.
But meantime, you were also making music in college. I mean, not just making music, you formed your own solo project that would kind of become known and release tons of albums, 1AM radio. And I mean, you start to perform in college. Tell me a little bit about the idea behind that project. And I mean, it was you, but you didn't name it you after you. It was like a different name.
Yeah. I had played drums in some bands in college, sort of continuing what I'd been doing in high school. But I had also started writing songs of my own, and just, quiet songs that I played on guitar. And the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college, I stayed in New Haven. I had a few jobs working at the library in school. They had a printing press in the basement of the library, and I got a job sort of maintaining it and printing and designing posters for exhibits in the library. And I got a job working at the local movie theater. And then I also had an internship in New York at a photography studio. And so between these three things, I was like, okay, I'm going to stay in New Haven and try and work on music in between. And so it was quiet, and I started playing open mics, just playing a few. I only had a few songs, but I would go and I'd play 2 or 3 or 4 songs at these open mics, and I wasn't really sure what it was or what it was going to be. But one of the places where I'd play was this bar called Rudy's, and the guy who managed it and who ran the open mics said, he was like, why don't you go record a demo? My friend has a studio, and I'll talk to him and I'll get you an hour of recording time so you can make a tape of some of these songs. It was really nice. And I took him up on it, and I went and, I went to the studio, and I had never recorded myself before, but I played guitar and sang, and it was just like one take of each song. But then I got this cassette, and I brought it back and I gave it to the guy at Rudy's, and had a copy for myself, and I would just sort of make copies, and that was kind of my my demo, I guess, for playing. But I was just playing under my own name at that point. It wasn't like a serious thing. I liked it, but it didn't feel like it warranted a name yet. So then I started playing some shows. I gave that tape to a couple friends of mine who put on shows, and I got the chance to open for some touring musicians who were coming through Connecticut. And I was trying to figure out what name I would use. I played a couple shows under the name Hrishikesh Hirway. I tried playing a show just under Hrishikesh, just my first name. And then this weird thing happened where someone asked, they saw my name, and they asked if it was world music, if that was an act, like a world music act, like if it was, I don't know, sithars and tablas or something like that, or some kind of fusion thing. And I remember one time someone was like, oh, and so what kind of music is that? And I said, oh, it's like it's like indie rock. And they were like, oh, so you sing in Hindi? And I was like, no, indie rock, not Hindi rock, and it was a little disheartening. To think that my name was going to sort of cause some level of confusion about what the music was going to sound like, or worse, in my imagination, somebody would see that, think that, and then imagine that this wasn't music for them. That somebody who might be someone who I'd want to have as an audience, or, as a listener, might say, oh, this world music is not my thing, or something. So I got kind of discouraged, and I thought, well, maybe this means I should have a name for my project instead of just playing under my own name. And I came up with a lot of kind of conceptual justifications for why that was a good idea. I thought about how some of my favorite singer-songwriters didn't use their own name. And I thought about Bill Callahan, who at the time he played under the name Smog. And I thought Smog was such a cool name for an artist. When I first heard Smog, I was like, oh, it's a band. But then I later learned that it was just one guy. And I thought about how having that kind of mask also might lead to being able to do different kinds of music. Or, I thought about how you could have somebody else sing. Like Tricky would sometimes have a different singer instead of him. And I don't know. I came up with reasons for why it would be a good idea. And so I came up with this name, the 1 a.m. radio, and started making music, and started performing, under that.
It makes me think of like LCD Sound System or Badly Drawn Boy. Right. I mean, there's so many examples of that.
Yeah, it felt like there was enough evidence of people doing that it wasn't so weird.
Yeah. This was more than a project. I mean, you graduated from school and you kind of decided to pursue it. You decided to move out to LA and see if you could make a go of it. Tell me about that decision to do that.
Well, one of the things that I had dreamt about, in addition to playing shows and putting out CDs, was trying to make music for films. And I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know anybody who did that. And I tried to study film in college, thinking maybe this would give me some kind of insight into the filmmaking process. But of course, it was the film studies program was born out of like the literature program at Yale, and it was really about just criticism and writing essays about Alfred Hitchcock and Godard and stuff like that. So it didn't really help in terms of the idea of like, well, how do I score films? But it seemed like I had to go to LA in order to try and just even get close to the possibility. And I felt like, well, the 1 a.m. radio was just me. It kind of was going to travel wherever I went. I could pick up and go wherever. So all of that led to me, also I had spent my entire life in New England, and I at a certain point felt like I couldn't deal with another New England winter. And so all of these things kind of combined, and I just felt like I got to go to LA.
So when you went there, from everything I've read, you wanted to pursue this idea of film scoring, but also see if you could make it with the 1 a.m. radio. And initially, you got a job as you do, as an assistant to a composer, and in the meantime, like recording your work, like in your apartment. What were you? How are you capturing your own music?
So by the time I moved to LA, I had already put out an album as the 1 a.m. radio, and I'd put out a few EPs and some vinyl 7-inch singles and things like that. I'd been touring, since college, so it had been a few years. But then when I moved to LA, I finally, I got a computer. I had Pro Tools on it. I had a microphone,
Yep.
and I had a little section of my apartment where I set up. I mean, you couldn't call it a studio at all. It was just the spot where my computer and microphone were, and where the desk was. And so I worked on my next record as the 1 a.m. radio over the first 2 years that I lived in LA.
I mean, you had some significant successes I'd say pretty early on, but it probably felt like an eternity. Some of the songs were featured on like major shows, One Tree Hill, Gossip Girl. There's a particularly a song Accidents, which I think was like really, it was out there. It was on TV shows. I want to ask you about this song in particular, because I think it's probably fair to say the best known 1 a.m. radio song, right?
Which one is that? Accidents?
Accidents?
Yeah, I don't know. It's sort of like it's like, which of these is the least obscure? I don't know if you could say best known, and more like which is the least unknown.
Yeah. But I mean, that song was in I think in the film Save the Date. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually wrote it for the film Save the Date. It was in 2011, so it really did feel like it was an eternity. I'd been grinding away for over a decade at that point, but a friend of mine, Michael Mohan, was writing and directing this film. It was an adaptation of a screenplay that had originally been done by the graphic novelist Jeffrey Brown, and we were both huge fans of his. And in Mike's adaptation, he had a scene where a character played a song in the movie, and he asked me to write that song. So that's how Accidents got started. I read the script, and I had to write the song for this scene in the movie. He sent me the screenplay, and I read it, and I kind of took everything in, and it was going to be a love song, or I wanted it I wanted to write a love song from this character's perspective. And the other thing that was going on that summer was that I was about to get married, and so I kind of took the one seed from the story of Save the Date, and then one from my own life, and wrote this song that was. It ended up really being like a template for my vows, my wedding vows.
Yeah.
And that was in June of 2011. But I had to write it really quickly because it was the first scene that they were going to were going to film for the movie.
I'm sort of backtracking a little bit, but you were releasing albums, you were writing music, you were also supporting yourself as a graphic artist. You worked, I think, for Apple at a certain point in time. Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you about, because the album that came out in 2004, named Written Water, got quite a bit of attention. It was named like Album of the Year in Time Out New York, and got some really good reviews. Tell me how you sort of, particularly on that record. Let's just talk about that record for a moment, or a track from that record. How did you begin to think about creating a song? How do you start? Do you start with words in your head, or do you start with a sound, or do you start with music?
It's so funny. I think my approach to making music is so different now than it was in those days. But at that time, especially, I felt like there was so much information. I was just hungry for music, and I felt like there was so much music to be discovered. And every day I felt like there was a new album, whether it was something that had newly come out or something, from a previous era that I'd never heard before, and all these ideas that were getting introduced. And I just got excited about all of them. And every time I heard a new idea, I thought, how do I make my own version of this? What's the way that I can imitate this, but also process it to be something that feels like me, and that was the thing that was so exciting to me. I think I was in my 20s, and even though it had been a few years since that 14 to 16-year-old period of when you're discovering music, I still felt that way. I felt like the world was getting bigger, and there was just more and more music to discover. So a lot of what drove my my songwriting at those days was just that. I was just exploring ideas, even just like vague production ideas or something like that. I would start with a drum sound that I had in my head. And I was like, how am I going to get these drums to sound this way? And I would just keep working on until I got the drums sounding the way I wanted them. And then, but I had no song, but I felt like an exciting idea. And I had this, I remember there's a song called Shivers that was on that album that's instrumental, but it had started with just some violin parts that I had recorded, someone playing, and I sat with those parts and just started cutting them up. I just started, literally just deleting parts of the track, and I got really excited about the rhythm of deleting stuff. And that ended up becoming an entire song, just from the idea of like, oh, what happens if I delete things in some kind of organized way from this violin recording.
I read that during this period of time when you were living in LA and supporting yourself with a variety of different jobs, but producing music, the first time that your parents kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe understood what you were doing was when one of your songs was in a film. That it was like,
it was in a TV commercial.
In a film. Okay, it was, yeah. So what? I mean, before then they were like, what were they doing? They were like, what are you doing out there? What's like, how you surviving?
Yeah, I think they, again, were just worried. My dad would, with some regularity, suggest maybe I should try going to graduate school. He would do it in a way that was kind of trying to be respectful of what I wanted to do, but he was like, you've been doing this for a while, and it's almost like you're running a business the way when you're touring and you have to make this, you're put out your record and you have to think about the budget. Maybe you should go get an MBA, or he would say, he was trying to be nice, but I think they just wanted to nudge me towards some direction of something that felt concrete and legitimate to them. They would see, how much money I was making. And I remember, one of our family friends is an accountant, and he would help me do my taxes every year. And so he would see how much money I was making. And I think he would go to my dad kind of shaking his head and being like, what's he doing? What's going on?
What is your Yale graduate son doing?
Yes.
I mean, of course, we know what eventually would happen with your career and all of your, success. But I wonder, during that time, how did you withstand that kind of pressure from family and others who were like, hey, you have all this potential. You could do whatever you want. You could go work for a tech company. You could start your own tech company. You could go do, any of these things. How did you keep your focus on making music? And how are you able to say, no, this is really what I meant to be doing?
The idea of making music was so exciting to me and intoxicating. I loved being able to do that. I was able to, pay my bills. I wasn't able to do much beyond pay my bills, but that was fine. It felt exciting to me, and it felt like, I don't know, it felt like I felt like I was on an adventure. The fact that it was something that nobody in my family could really understand or relate to, and none of our family friends could understand or relate to, didn't make it harder for me. It made it more appealing, I think, because it felt like I was setting off on my own in a way that I really loved. So okay, well, what does it take to make that happen? I just knew that I had to make enough money to be able to eat and pay rent, and I was able to do that. You know, I didn't have to I didn't have to stop making music in order to do that. It just meant maybe it changed the pace. Maybe I wouldn't be able to go on tour until I had X amount of money in the bank, and I knew that, okay, I can pay 2 months of rent, so I can go on. I have 2 months of rent in the bank, so I can go on tour for a month, and then I'll come back and I'll figure it out. I wasn't worried about the stuff that they were worried about, because it was all I wanted to do.
Did you, when you were putting out records, did you? I mean, my assumption is that any artist is putting out music with the hope that it just strikes. It's a sort of like connects in a big way. It becomes widely listened to, widely disseminated. In that period of time in your life, sort of 2000 to 2011, you were putting out, you're really super prolific, but it wasn't, your music wasn't going to, be played on the radio at that time. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
Was it discouraging, or did you not really care?
I would say for the first several years, I didn't care. I mean, just the idea that I was playing in front of anybody felt great. I think the scale of what my expectations were changed over the years, but playing shows, in front of 20, 30 people in like a basement of some kid's parents' house, that felt exciting, because that was 20 or 30 more people who had heard my music than the day before. And I think it got harder as I went further along, because I think the sort of the goalposts moved. And so my sense of what the next step was, I did think about the idea of growing or getting bigger, just like feeling like I was making more progress. And I felt like I was, but it was by inches, it was incrementally. And I think I also started to see some of my peers experiencing some of that kind of success. And that was new, and that suddenly opened my eyes up to what was possible. I think so much of my frame of reference was confined to what I knew, and I just didn't know much. I didn't know anybody who'd played in a band. I didn't know anybody who made records for a living, and I didn't have any sense of it. I remember at one point thinking about Yola Tango. Yola Tango was a band that I really loved, and and I was like, okay, Ira and Georgia from Yola Tango are a married couple, and I think this must be their living. This must be what they do. They've been doing it forever. And I didn't know if they had day jobs or anything like that, but in my mind, they didn't. The Yola Tango was their job, and they were a family, and music was their life. And I thought, what does that mean? Like, what does it take to just be able to live and make music your life? I looked at them and I thought, well, I love them, and a lot of people I know love them, but they're not. They're not some band that's getting played on top 40 radio or anything like that. It's not like they have videos on MTV or whatever. And I tried to imagine. I was like, what does that mean? Like, how much money did they make? Like, what do you need for a salary to live like that? And but whatever that abstract version was, Yola Tango in my head in the early 2000s was kind of like the goal that I was, without knowing any specifics, that was the goal that I had in my head. I thought they seem to be, they're a wonderful band who everybody respects, who are incredible songwriters, and could I make my life something like theirs? That was what I thought, even though I didn't know anything about their life, and I still don't really.
But you're right. Their music is incredible. I listened to Autumn Sweater a lot during the pandemic. For some reason, that song really spoke to me. It's beautiful. They make beautiful music. So, here you are. You are sort of 10 years in your time in LA, or 12 years in, and you'd gone back and forth. I know you left LA for a while, and you came back, and you had made films for television, and you were doing some scoring work. So you had some really interesting experiences. But I guess around that time, from what I gather, you kind of hit a block, like you kind of hit a wall where you just weren't able to write. What was going on? Here you've just been so prolific. You just released so much music. You were writing music and lyrics, and then, bam, there's a wall. What was it?
I didn't feel like I was very prolific at that time. I recorded an EP when I was in college. It came out in 2000, and then I was touring and stuff, and I put out my first album in 2002. And then the second album came out in 2004, so there was 2 years in between. And then the third album came out in 2007, and there were 3 years in between. And then the fourth album came out in 2011, so there were 4 years in between. It felt like getting to the next record was taking longer and longer each time. And I was frustrated. I would see bands who were putting out records, like they'd put out a record every year and a half. And I couldn't figure out how to muster that kind of pace. So it didn't feel prolific to me. And the other thing that was happening was this sense of scale kind of changing. It didn't feel in 2011. Suddenly now playing in front of 30 people in somebody's basement felt like a huge letdown. I think one of the things that changed a lot was starting in 2007. I hit this goal that I had been working towards for a very, very long time, which was, can I make a living from making music? Some version of that Yo La Tengo idea of like, can this be my job? And that was the first year that I didn't have to, do freelance design or anything like that. I made my entire living, from a combination of, having a song in a TV show and producing a record for another band and going on tour and stuff like that. Whatever the different income sources that came my way, they were all through music, and I was able to pay my bills that way. And that felt incredible. I felt like I had really reached an important milestone. But after a few years of that, it actually, I think, hurt my process a lot because now I was thinking about it. I was thinking about what my music was in terms of its economic viability and my chances of continuing to make a living. And 2008, okay, I'm still living off of some of the money that I made in 2007, but maybe I need to do something else. And then 2009, I still haven't made a new record. So the chance to restart that cycle is getting a little further away. And then, by the time I got to 2011, I was like, okay, here's 4 years of work. Here's the next record. And this really needs to be big enough. It needs to make enough of an impact that it can carry me through not just this year, but then whatever it takes till I get to the next thing. And again, it was bigger than what I had done before, but not in a hugely life-changing way. Again, it was just kind of incremental. And
by the way, presumably you had to finance records and distribute them, or were you getting some help with that?
I was signed to a record label for my third and fourth records, so I did have help, but it also added to the pressure, I think, because now I felt like I didn't want to let them down, and I felt like also, when you sign to a label, it's kind of like getting a loan from the bank in a way. There's an agreement, and the agreement is partly what you think you can do, but it's partly a level of it's kind of quantifying how much another entity believes in you. And for a while, I ended up working as the art director for the record label, helping them with graphic design and some of the creative direction for stuff. And in my experience working with the label, I started to see and hear about what other artists got, like the other kinds of deals that were happening, and then you start to realize, oh, okay, so you believe in me this much, you believe in this person this much more.
Yeah.
And so then I had something to prove, not just to myself, but also to kind of like the promise of this record contract. Cause in a way you're in debt at that point. And I hated debt. I'd spent so long trying to, work my way out of my student loans from college and from high school. And I never, I didn't have a credit card for the first 7 years of my life after graduating college, because I never wanted to have any kind of debt. So I only bought what I could afford. I hated that idea. And that's essentially what you're getting yourself into with a record deal. It's like, well, now you're in debt. You don't physically, you don't have to pay them back yourself, but you're not going to make any money until your record makes money. And anyway, it's all this stuff that has nothing to do with the joy of making music or performing it. And all of those pressures started to accumulate. And after that fourth record came out, I was really daunted by the idea that I had to start all over again and try and make another record and hope that this time the things would be different. There's this thing with maybe any art form, but novelty is such a huge factor in terms of getting people's attention. It's a lot more exciting for some reason for someone to say, hey, have you heard this band you've never heard of? They have it's their first record and it's amazing, versus somebody saying, hey, this person who you've heard maybe before in passing, their fifth record is coming out, and you've heard, and while you felt somewhat okay about the first four, this one you're going to be really excited by. It's just a harder sell. Or whether it's somebody's book or it's someone's film, that kind of the debut or whatever. When somebody's a new entity, it's a lot more. It's a lot easier, I think, for the press to get excited about it. It's a lot easier for people to want to tell that story. And I was aware of that. And I was thinking, well, what's going to happen when I put out the next record? Is anybody who's going to care that doesn't already care? What's the chance of me growing my audience anything more than once again by a matter of inches? And I got kind of depressed by that, I think, frankly. And and when I tried to write, I had to exceed that pressure. I had to overcome those kinds of ideas, and I just couldn't do it. And the only time I was able to do it was when I wrote Accidents, and there it was because my friend Mike was like, "Hey, I need that song tomorrow so we can start shooting the movie."
I mean, it's interesting that this kind of, you hit this point where it all coalesced, and you just sort of, for a period of time, stopped, because in a sense, it was like the gods were trying to send you a signal, like a message, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but it was as if they were some force was trying to say, there is something you will do in addition to music that will really have a huge impact. And it was something that if you would have told yourself in 2010 or 2011 that it was going to be, audio programs, you probably would have been like, what, me? What are you talking about? I don't do that.
Yeah. I think what happened. So in 2013, I was in this moment of transition. After I finished the last record, I did this, the score for Save the Date, and then I scored another film called R. Nixon, and I thought, okay, here we go. Maybe what needed to happen was now I'm going to start scoring films.
Films, yeah.
Save the Date played at Sundance, and I was like, all right, here we go. This is going to be my path to filmmaking.
Yeah. Danny Elfman.
Right, exactly. But it kind of didn't go anywhere. Once again, even getting R. Nixon, getting the second movie was an uphill battle, where I chased down a filmmaker who I really loved. I'd seen a short film of hers, Penny Lane, and then I signed up for a newsletter, and she said she was making a feature about Richard Nixon, and I wrote to her and I said, "Do you have a composer?" We'd never met, and I was just like, "Can I work with you?" And I had to audition for it. Eventually I got it. And then that film played at South by Southwest, and it got picked up by CNN, and I thought, okay, here we go. Like now,
Yeah.
But nobody was sort of knocking on my door asking me to score films. The fact that I had done it a couple times wasn't any kind of guarantee of any future projects. I really still had to hustle a lot. And that was one of the things that I had been so tired of in terms of like my music career, was just like the constant hustle in addition to the actual work of making the thing. So, after that movie was done, and I still didn't have even the start of whatever the next 1AM radio record would be. In 2013, I thought, well, maybe this is a time for me to try some other things. Maybe this is a moment where I should stop being so single-minded about my music career. And maybe there's some other, besides the 1AM radio and this film scoring stuff, maybe there's some other things that I ought to try and pursue. And I kind of gave myself permission to be like, okay, this year, 2013, this is going to be the year that I try some other things.
Yeah.
And I tried a lot of other things that year.
What'd you try?
I started a new band. I started making music with Lakeith Stanfield, who I'd met when I was at South by Southwest with R. Nixon. I went and saw a film that he was in called Short Term 12. And in that movie, he has a scene where he raps. And I ended up talking to him after the film, and we exchanged information. And I asked him if I could send him some instrumentals for him to write over. And that ended up becoming a band. And for the first time, I was like, I'm making music in this other mode. And I also I made a pilot for a television show. In 2013, I was just pitching it, but I had come up with this idea for a game show, and I teamed up with at the time a new friend of mine, Josh Molina, who I was a big fan of from his work on The West Wing and Sports Night, and we were trying to produce this TV show together. So we were in the process of sort of pitching that. And then in addition to those two things, I started working on the pilot of what would be Song Exploder. This idea of a show where musicians could talk about how they made one of their songs, and listeners could hear the song broken down in a way that, usually only the person who made the song gets to hear. And they could hear about sort of the hidden sounds, but also the hidden ideas that went into the song's creation.
Yeah, I want to. It's interesting because hearing about that moment in time where you just sort of started to ask yourself, "Am I going to do another record? And is it going to just, is the whole process of this more frustrating than the joy of it?" It seems like it almost liberated you to explore these very different things, like going up to Lakeith Stanfield's amazing actor's role in Judas and the Black Messiah is just incredible. That character he plays in that film, the role is amazing. to go up to him and say, hey, let's try to collaborate, and then to go to Josh Molina and say, hey, maybe we can do something together, and then explore maybe a podcast about music. I feel like that wall kind of, right, it kind of just gave you the license to just try a bunch of different things.
Yeah. I think it was both exciting, but at the same time, it was also a little bit disheartening. I think because to do that meant I had to acknowledge that I had hit a wall, that that my music career wasn't where I wanted it to be, and because if it were, then there would be no need to try these other ideas.
Right.
So it was. I felt ambivalent about that time, but I was also excited about these things, and it was exciting to be allowed to feel excited about something other than the 1 a.m. radio.
Was the idea behind Song Exploder, you knew how to compose, music, you know what it takes to create a song. You know all of the things that go into its composition and its construction and its conception and any other C words that I can come up with around putting a song together, the complexity around it that a listener just doesn't understand, can't know. And I guess I wonder, knowing your own experience with music, did you kind of think, I wonder if I can ask other people about their experience and in a sense, kind of learn about their process? Was that kind of the way you were thinking about it?
I wasn't thinking about it expressly as sort of, I'm going to get to learn lessons from these people who I'm talking to. But that was certainly part of it, because that was what made it exciting for me. The kinds of conversations that I was having with other musicians. I started by talking to my friends, and I would just ask them in a slightly more formal way the kinds of questions I would ask them anyway. I would hear a song that a friend of mine had made that I thought was really interesting, and I would just say, hey, will you tell me, what was that? I love this line. What was that line about? And I always learn something about it. That curiosity didn't live in my mind as like a way of me kind of trying to educate myself. It just felt like something fun to talk about and that I was genuinely interested in. I think later I was able to kind of recognize that I was kind of putting together some kind of curriculum for myself
and others. It is a masterclass in so many ways, and I have no doubt that it made you better as a composer and musician.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, it's funny to be able actually to say that, because for a long time, I don't think I could have said that because I wasn't making songs yet. Again, there were many years where I was making Song Exploder, and I was not writing songs of my own again, and so even though I was putting together all of these stories about creativity and other people's processes, there was no sort of songwriting process of my own that I could apply it to. So it felt a little sad, I think, if I'm being honest, to be sort of in these kinds of conversations with great songwriters talking about how they'd made this thing that was successful enough that I wanted to talk to them about it. But no, I didn't have an outlet of my own to ever, sometimes I would get that question and someone would be like, oh my gosh. And so have you gotten to incorporate these lessons in your own music? And I was like, well, I don't have any music right now. I was doing work for hire. I was scoring projects and things like that, but that feels very different than the way that I felt about writing my own songs.
Now you're able to look at it with some perspective, but if I'm looking at that time period, I'm thinking to myself, well, you are in a form of hibernation. Hibernation is not the absence of learning. You are absorbing information and growing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are ready to produce or make it yourself yet or return to it. But it doesn't. Right. But at the same time, like you're absorbing all of these lessons that will pay off. It might have been 2, 3, 4 years before you would return to it, but that period of time, I have no doubt, was just so incredibly valuable to enabling you to return to it.
Yeah, I think in the moment it's hard to distinguish
it's hard.
hibernation from death when you're in it. So I didn't know if I would ever make music again, or if that was just a permanent state of things.
I mean, this show began to really gain attention and success. I remember hearing it in 2014 and just thinking, my God, I will never. I've been in broadcasting for 25 years now, and I just thought, man, I'll never make anything as good as this. And it was so good. I remember hearing, like just the DJ Shadow episode, or Peter, Bjorn, and John, or just hearing that, and just how there's so many things about that show and how you did it that are so remarkable. One of the most remarkable things about it is you're not in it. You spend hours gathering this material from the artist, and you're interviewing them. You have to get that information, and then you remove yourself from it. We used to call those audio postcards when I worked at NPR, and just found natural voices, or the person narrating it, and that was a conscious decision you made to take yourself out of this work, which is there's an incredible amount of humility to do that, to be able to do that. Tell me about why you decided to do that.
The show was always sort of designed that way. I did that in the very first draft of the first. I did that in the first draft of the pilot because I didn't really have a lot of examples for what I was trying to do for the show. I wasn't a very experienced podcast listener, and I only knew, besides listening to music on the radio, I didn't know that much about radio either. Certainly audio as a form of storytelling. So the cues for how to make the show for me came from what I'd seen in documentary films and TV programs. And in that, what I felt like I always saw was the camera would be pointed at the subject, and that's what you see. You see them and you hear them, and they're the ones telling the story. And I thought if I could present this story like that, it would feel more real, or it would feel more legit. And that was a big concern that I had at the beginning, was that this thing feel legit. And that even though it was this kind of homemade thing that I was doing DIY in my garage, or actually at the time when I first started, it was just in my bedroom. I didn't have a garage because I was living in an apartment, but I didn't want it to feel that way. I wanted somebody to be able to listen to it and think that it had this sort of like level of professional polish to it. So that format of just hearing the guest, I was like, oh, that's how you do it. That's the real way of doing it. And then there was this other part of me that was very conscious of the idea of not wanting the show to seem like it was supposed to be a vehicle for me in any kind of way. I think partly I was afraid that somebody would hear it and think, oh, this guy who's a failed musician is talking to successful musicians in a way to kind of legitimize his own existence as a musician or something like that. And that scared the hell out of me. So that fed into the decision as well. I was like, well, if I can make it in this kind of sort of pristine way, that takes me out of it, then someone can listen to it and never have to even consider who made it. They don't have to think about, who was, maybe they'll never even think about the existence of an interviewer. They'll just appreciate this thing in its purest form. It's just a piece of storytelling. And certainly because I didn't have any experience as an interviewer or as a journalist or anything like that, I didn't feel like I had any kind of bona fides to justify being on the mic myself.
I think one of the things that, again, at the time, I know it was probably hard to see it this way because part of you is thinking, God, am I going to be perceived as a failed musician and like am I trying to restart my career through this thing? But the other part of it was the amount of creative thought that has to go in to a highly produced show like that is just mind-blowing. Most people don't know that. I mean, we're in audio, we know that. And I can't even begin to imagine all of the layers in every episode of that show. So in not in a sense, but in a major way, you were pouring a lot of that creative energy into turning that conversation into this beautiful jewel box. I mean, you were presumably, maybe without even knowing, pushing the limits of your creativity.
I was definitely scratching some itch that I still had for making music by making the show. And the way that I made the show, because I didn't have any kind of understanding of how to make a podcast, I was basically trying to combine the way that I made music and the way that I thought of things as a designer. I was trying to bring those things together in this format. I was like, well, what would be the best way to design this, but then also have it feel musical? And so I was really trying to put all of that energy that normally would have gone into writing songs and producing records, into whatever this episode was that I was making at the time.
I mean, that it wasn't like with most things. It wasn't, it wasn't a hit right away. It had a bit of a slow burn, but then became a really well-known show today. One of the, easily one of the best-known podcasts out there. Were you surprised at the response to it?
Did you ever watch Freaks and Geeks? Mm-hmm. I remember reading an interview. I think it was with Judd Apatow, where he was talking about the geeks, Sam and his friends, and how someone was asking about those characters, and he was like, well, they're the geeks, but not to them. Like, for them, they're cool. It's just that the rest of the world hasn't recognized it yet.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of what got me excited about making the show in the first place. Was I was like, I think this could be really cool. I knew it was something that I wanted to hear. And I thought there must be other people like me who would be excited by this too. And, I started the process of making the pilot in the spring of 2013, and it didn't come out until January of 2014, partly because I'd pitched the idea of the podcast to a whole bunch of places to see. I mean, part of the reason why I did it also was because I was also thinking like, well, if I'm not making music and I'm not touring right now, like how am I going to make any kind of money outside of doing more freelance design work? And I thought this was exciting because I was like, this is a way for me to kind of be a designer and a musician at the same time. Could I make this, and maybe some company or some brand or some platform would say, hey, this is a cool show and we want to pay for it and we want to pay you to make it. That was part of what was feeding the process early on. And for 9 months, I took it around, and nobody wanted to do that. Nobody was interested in audio as like a branded form of content.
Right. This was still the sort of the Stone Age of podcasts.
Yeah. But I really was excited about the idea, and it felt like, I don't know, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't believe in it, and I didn't know what the scale of anything was. I didn't know what the possibilities were, other than I thought this seems like a cool thing that I feel like somebody would like well enough that I could make a job out of this, or like not like a full-time job, but like a part-time job, something that could be a way for me to maintain being able to pay my bills while I, maybe hopefully I'll get to music again someday or something like that. But here's a cool day job that I could come up with for myself. So I was pleasantly surprised when the show started to pick up steam, but it also felt like I felt a little bit like I was justified, like some instinct that I had. I got to justify having that instinct that it was worth spending my time on this, kind of weird project.
You had gone from, and you never stopped making music. I mean, as you say, you were composing and doing projects here and there, but for a time you stopped making albums under your own name or 1AM Radio, but then you begin this like period of just, like making podcasts or being involved in podcasts, like a lot of them, The West Wing Weekly, which became a huge show, and you were involved in a show called City Soundtracks and The Jump, and then you did Home Cooking with Simi Nusrat, and then another show called Partners that you do now, where you talk to people about their professional and personal partnerships, a little bit like Yola Tango, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I like, part of me is sort of like looking at the story and saying, okay, you got to this point where you kind of reached a limit of where you felt you could get to at that point. I know that I'm kind of wrapping a bow around this, but it's like you pivot to something totally different, kind of just trying things out, and then you become really good at that thing and really successful at that thing, and it kind of just leads to the next thing in that world. Like once you made Song Exploder, did it feel like just all of these ideas started to come out of you for other audio programs you could make?
It was a slow process. That pilot that I made with Josh Molina in 2013 and 2014, it ended up, we made it, we filmed it, we sold it, and then the network we sold it to ended up getting bought by somebody else, and it got lost in the shuffle, and we were trying to find another home for it. And by that time it was 2015, and Song Exploder had been around for about a year and a half, and I was really enjoying it. And I remember emailing Josh after, I think we were supposed to have a meeting with a network, and it had been rescheduled. We were like supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen, and then they rescheduled for 6 weeks later. And then those 6 weeks went by, and the day before they said, "Oh, the president of the show, of the network, who we were supposed to meet with, has been replaced by a new person, and we're going to have to set this meeting for another months from now." And that felt like the last straw for me. I was just so impatient, and I suggested to Josh, like, maybe we should make a podcast. What would you say about a podcast about the West Wing? And it doesn't really exist, but we could take some of what I've been doing with Song Exploder. You could be the insider, and we could talk about the show, from your perspective as someone who was on the show. And I've been having so much fun with Song Exploder, and we don't need to ask anybody's permission. We don't need to have the green light from anybody. We can just make it. And I was really excited about the freedom that I discovered from making podcasts. It felt like making music again when I was in college or fresh out of college, where you're just doing it. And you get to show up at somebody's punk show, and you play in front of whoever, and there are people who are there to listen to what you have to make. And so, eventually Josh said yes. It took a few months of convincing him. But that was, by the time we launched that, it had been over 2 years since Song Exploder had come out. and then Partners in Home Cooking, those came out in 2020. So it was definitely a medium that I was really enjoying, but I think it took making these two different shows, Song Exploder and West Wing Weekly, which were so different in format and tone, before I felt like, oh, okay, I understand. I am starting to recognize all the possibilities that are available when you just say, oh, okay, I'm going to make something in this medium. And then I got really excited about like, well, what are the other shows that you can make? And then I feel like there isn't enough time for me to make all the podcasts that I want to make.
I first heard about your mom when you wrote an article. Actually, I think Simi Nosrat wrote an article in the New York Times about a recipe that she got from you. And it was your mom's famous Thanksgiving sort of kind of cheesecake made with a particular kind of mango. And at the time, your mom already was, she was in kind of had advanced Parkinson's, I think, at the time when that article came out. Your mom passed away in 2020, and I wonder whether that, what at that time were you? It would inspire an incredible song I want to ask you about in a moment. But I wonder when she passed away, were you already at a point where you were thinking about returning to releasing your own music?
I was. In 2018, I wrote a 1 a.m. radio song again for the first time, in 7 years. My friend Jenny Owen Youngs, at the time, she was not yet my friend. She was an acquaintance, but she had approached me about writing a song with her. She was like me in that she was a singer and a songwriter, and she'd made records, but she also had a podcast. And she used to write songs as part, she still does, write songs as part of her podcast too. And she invited me to co-write a song with her. I had been a guest on the podcast. It's about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Mm-hmm. And I'd been on to talk about it. I think I had mentioned Buffy, once in an episode of the West Wing Weekly, and she and her co-host had heard that, and so they said, "Well, do you want to come and talk to us about Buffy the Vampire Slayer?" But I really didn't know her outside of that one interaction where we did the taping. But a few months later, she asked me if I wanted to write a song for an episode, and I wasn't sure if I knew how to write a song still, but she seemed undaunted by the idea that I hadn't written anything in a long time. And we got together and we wrote a song, and it was the most incredible feeling. I had waited so long for the experience of like, here's an idea I have for a lyric, and maybe the melody could go like this. And to be in a room with her and just play with those ideas, and then by the end of it, we're like, okay, here are our verses, here are our chorus. It was really extraordinary. It felt like after you've been through a really bad breakup, and you're like, well, that's it. I'm never ever going to love anybody again. No one's ever going to love me again. Like the part of my life to be. The part of my life where I feel these feelings, it's gone. It's done. And then you meet somebody, and then you're like, oh gosh, it's like I'm in high school again, and I'm, I remember now what it's like to have a crush on somebody. That was how it felt. But it was about making music. And so I was so excited, and I asked Jenny if we could get together again and write a song, potentially write a 1 a.m. radio song. And she said, yeah. And a few weeks later, we got together and we wrote a song, a song called Memory Palace. And it was inspired in part by my mom, and it was inspired in part by Sandra Day O'Connor, and this letter that she had recently issued, this public letter, telling people that she had Alzheimer's and that she was going to withdraw from public life. And my mom's condition was this, progressive neurodegenerative disease. It was called PSP, which is progressive supranuclear palsy. And and as I was kind of coming to grips with that, with my mom's decline, and seeing this beautiful letter from Justice O'Connor, I wanted to write about it. Suddenly, and at the same time, feeling connected once again to the idea of being able to write a song. I knew I wanted to try and make something out of those feelings and out of those ideas, and I asked Jenny if she would help me, and she did, and that was again, it was just an incredible thing to then, besides writing a song for Jenny for her project, suddenly I'd written something that was deeply personal. And I just thought, okay, I can't wait. I've got to get back to making music again.
Shortly after your mom passed, you had a dream where you saw her, and that dream inspired a song, Between There and Here. And did you wake up from that dream and write down your recollections of it immediately?
Actually, I didn't write anything down. So coincidentally, I had that dream on a Thursday night, and then the following day, I already had a meeting planned with Jenny. We were going to write a song together. We were supposed, or try to write a song together. We were supposed to do this the month earlier, but it had gotten postponed because my mom passed away, and I had to go travel for the funeral. So we'd rescheduled it, and I remember waking up from that dream and thinking how much I wanted to just hold on to the feeling of it. And I feel like when you kind of only get one chance to express what you dreamt and still have the feeling. You can tell the story, you might be able to say the words, but you won't feel the feeling. And I wanted to hold on to the feeling as long as I could, so that I could somehow try and bottle it or keep some kind of pure version of it, and put it into a song. So I didn't write it down. I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell my wife about the dream. I kind of just had a very quiet morning. I got ready and didn't really say much at all. And then when I got together with Jenny over Zoom, because this was in the pandemic, I told her, I said, this is, I have something I want to write about, and it's about my mom. And Jenny knew, she had known about my mom's passing and everything. And so she said, okay. And so I just started I waited until I could talk to her before I said anything about the dream. I said, this is what happened. And I just kind of recounted beat by beat what happened in the dream and how I felt about it. And we had a Google Doc open between the two of us, and we were writing things down. Really, Jenny was writing things down as I kind of
just stream of consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And then that became the sort of the raw material for what the song would be. But yeah, I wanted to keep it inside, so that it didn't dissipate by the time I got to the point where I would be sitting down to try and write.
It's very visual from the beginning. That you're describing this very real experience. Holding out a glass of water, calling your name, hearing your voice. The door is left open. The lyrics of the door are left ajar. More poetic than my descriptions, but it really is. You're taking us through this very real experience. That this thing that you felt that wasn't it was real.
Yeah. I think one of the things that was so exceptional about that dream for me, besides, of course, being able to see my mom for the first time, was just how mundane it was. It was not, there were certain cliche dream things about, oh, it was my house, but it wasn't my house, all that kind of stuff. But there was just a really palpable, familiar memory to it too. Every night I used to bring my mom a glass of water when we lived in the same house. There was a time when my dad was living elsewhere because his job was, his job as a food scientist was in the Midwest, but we still had our house in Massachusetts. My sister was away in grad school, and it was just me and my mom living at home. And she would go to bed a little earlier than I would, and before I went to sleep, she would, she would always say, like, "Could you bring me a glass of water?" And I would get a glass of water. It was always this, this stainless steel. My family, like so many Indian families, have these like stainless steel cups, and I would always just bring that cup of water, and that was what it was in the dream. Was I needed to leave a glass of water at her nightstand, and then we would say goodnight, and I would, and she'd have the TV on, and I would close the door so I wouldn't disturb her as I, went off and read or whatever for the next hour while she went to sleep. And all of that stuff was in the dream. So it was very easy to kind of describe it visually because it wasn't just a dream. It was a memory that I had countless times.
How did you construct it musically?
When I actually got home from the funeral, the day that I flew home, I sat down with my guitar, not with the idea of just that I was gonna write something or anything, but it was a strange time. My wife and I were in the house. It was my first time being back home since the moment that I learned my mom had passed away. I got on a plane an hour later, and then had spent the next couple weeks in Rhode Island with my dad. And so I was coming back, and I was just in the house, and I had picked up the guitar and I played some chords. I had played this little finger picking pattern, and I liked it. I didn't know what it was going to be, and I recorded a little voice memo. And then when I got together with Jenny to start writing this, it was about 2 weeks later. And I thought, well, I do have this piece of music that also feels connected to my mom, or feels connected to this feeling, and feels connected to my grief in some way. And so I pulled that progression out and then we tried to pair these ideas and these memories of this dream to the feeling and the sort of pacing of that guitar part.
There's a part of the song that is played by Yo-Yo Ma. He's playing cello, and you've talked about this a little bit. That represents your mom's voice. How did that come about? How did you sort of come with the idea of having the cello represent her voice in the song?
I had, I think, one of the most extraordinary conversations of my life around that time with Yo-Yo Ma. I was going to be moderating a conversation for him for an event. I'd interviewed him for Song Exploder and for Home Cooking as well. And with both of those, we had talked, he and I had talked sort of not quite as formally as a pre-interview, but we'd talked in addition to the times when we actually were on mic. So, and he wanted to do something similar, before the event, just get together. And I thought it was to sort of prepare, I could tell him what my questions were going to be and stuff like that. But really he just wanted to talk a little bit about life and just things. And after I kind of gave him my spiel about what I was going to ask him for our event, he just was asking me about my own life. And the theme that I was presenting to him for the conversation we were going to have was creative longevity. about how he maintains his relationship to music and creativity, like over such a long career. How does he stay connected to it? And stuff like that. And then he turned the tables on me and he said, well, what are your answers to these questions? And he asked me about just stuff that was going on in my life. And it was incredibly kind. And I told him about how I had been separated from making music for so long, and how I was just finally getting back to making it. That one of the things that had kept me from making music, I think at this time it was still an idea. I'd only written that one song with Jenny. I had only written Memory Palace, and I was setting out on trying to make music again. But and I told him why it had been so hard for me to write music, because for a long time it was a lot easier to imagine making an episode of Song Exploder than making a song of my own, because it felt like something I knew how to do it, and it had a certain process that I had come to understand, and it had a cadence. I put out an episode every 2 weeks, and I felt like I was somehow of service when I made an episode of Song Exploder. I was doing something for another artist, for people who might want to know about that song, or who wanted to feel inspired or something like that. Versus making a song where I didn't know if would a song ever come out? Would it be any good? Would it serve anybody other than me? Would it be just indulgent? These were all things that had kind of kept me from writing songs in the past. And I was telling him about this, and he said, well, as you're writing music, let me ask you this. He could see, we were talking over Zoom, so he could see in my studio. He'd been there for Song Exploder before, and he was like, I know you have all these instruments around you, and one of them was a cello. I have a cello in the corner of my room, and he was like, as you're writing music, could you imagine writing a cello part, and could you write a cello part for me to play? Because then you would be obligated to me. And it was this unbelievable gift, to put it that way. Essentially, it was, in a way, it was kind of like when Mike had told me to write a song for Save the Date, that it was like, I had to do this thing out of obligation to someone else. But really, it was this judo flip that he turned it around on me. So suddenly now I had to do this thing for myself in order to fulfill this promise. And I mean, what am I going to do? Like, not fulfill a promise that I was going to make to Yo-Yo Ma?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about him, and when I wrote this song about my mom, I was thinking about her and how she used to sing. She would sometimes sing 1AM radio songs to herself, and I thought, oh, is there a way that I could kind of bring this version of the ghost of my mom, essentially? Could she have a presence in this song? And I had hummed this part, but it didn't feel right for it to be. If I hummed it, it's just me. If it's humming, it's just human. And I thought, well, this was the right moment and the right opportunity to ask Yo-Yo Ma to play something, because his playing is so human and it's so expressive, and honestly more magical than anything I could do with my voice. And so it felt like the perfect instrument to capture the idea of the memory of my mom's voice.
It almost seems like the kind of, you're at your most creative when you feel like you're serving other people. Like you mentioned with Song Exploder, you're making this show because people are going to be interested in this artist, and it's about their music. And then Yo-Yo Ma says, write me a part of this song.
Yeah.
And because he says that, and you're writing a song about your mom, it's not about you or some selfish pursuit, even though writing music is not a selfish pursuit. But I think I'm just trying to imagine like what's going on in your head. It's about other people, and so it's easier for you to kind of unleash this creative power in the sense because it's about others.
Yeah. I think being an artist of any kind is really an enterprise of ego. To have the kind of audacity to say, "Oh, I have an idea, and I'm going to make other people, listen to it or look at it or experience it somehow." And I know that, and I know that I have those feelings, and I want to do that. But it's also a pretty big source of conflict for me too, because what gives me the right, and like what, I don't know. I feel like you have to justify why you would ask someone to do that. Like what makes what you've got special, and it's pretty hard. But I think if I can feel like I'm doing something and it's not for me and not just serving that ego, it's probably a myth. It probably all just is, but it helps me. I think it helps me overcome that a little bit and actually try and do the work part of it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You think about, somebody who runs for president. Or somebody who has a big idea and they want to put it out into the world, and that's okay, right? Having something and wanting to put it out into the world, even though there's an element of ego. What we're doing here, what I do, what we all do, in a public way, there's an element of that, but that's okay too. It's okay.
Yeah, I think I need to remember that.
Do you think now that you've released this record, it's been, you sort of, I guess, kind of took a 6-7 year period where you were not making your own music to release under your own name, and now you are back to doing that, or really doing it for the first time under your name.
Yeah.
Do you think that now you can come back to it fully, 2 feet in and back into the world of making and releasing music again, your own?
I hope so. That's definitely the daydream right now. I think I'm the happiest I've been in a long time, because I've been doing that. The record came out, a couple songs came out, a few months ago, and now the record came out, and then I started playing shows again, and it feels like I'm a musician, not just in a kind of abstract theoretical way. Sometimes for the description of Song Exploder or something like that, or a bio, I be like, oh, I make Song Exploder, I'm a musician, and I produce this podcast. And that little sentence fragment of I'm a musician was to provide context for how the show was made and kind of what went into it, and a little way of nodding towards my background. But it also felt like, I don't know, it felt like hypothetical. And now it feels like it's not just hypothetical. I'm doing what I love again. And even if it's at a small scale, or whatever scale it's at, I have that, teenage feeling again, about it. And, it's really nice. It's really nice. It's really nice to just be engaged with it again. So yeah, I hope to keep it going as long as I can.
One of the things that I've noticed about almost everyone that's been on this show is there's almost this invisible force in which they must do many different things. you've got audio programs, many audio programs. You compose music for yourself and for others and for films. You have a television show with Netflix, and you perform live. And it's probably stating the obvious, but it seems to me that all of those things feed into the other, that all of those things are necessary in order for you to grow in all of those different ways.
Yeah, I really like... Let me put it this way. One thing that I discovered after I had that period where I was going to sort of allow myself to do other things was that I really like doing other things. That when I'm happiest, I'm actually able to kind of apply myself in sort of different directions, and some part of it is something I've never done before. At the end of last year, I made a couple of music videos for some of the new songs, and I'd never directed anything, but I had the experience of making the Netflix show, and I got to take some part of that, some part of the TV show, which came out of making the podcast, which came out of making music, and apply it to music again. But in this new way, and with this new kind of role that I that I gave myself, but it was a chance to do something that I'd never done before, and I think that's maybe the hardest part about having any kind of I don't know, any kind of job, any kind of creative pursuit where you do something. You're like, how do you find new things in it? And for me, the easiest way, if somewhat complicated, is to just add more things to do. And so that's part of the reason why I get excited about doing new stuff, is because it opens that door, but it also makes it hard because I still want to do the other stuff too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying this to somebody who has, how many podcasts do you have now? You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about.
I
where
just
it's
wrote them down.
Right.
I just wrote them down. I've got five.
Five,
right now.
exactly. And
yeah.
At a certain point, you're like, oh, I love doing this one that I love this show that I make, but I have this idea for something new, and I want to do that. And now suddenly you've just doubled your workload, or quintupled your workload in your case.
Yeah. I have attention deficit disorder for sure. I'm sure undiagnosed. I do. I just was thinking about it today because our team, and me and my team, we produce 5.5 hours of different programs a week, and it's a lot. But it's as you know. I mean, one idea leads to another and another and another. And I was just talking to my colleagues on who I have Tinkercast with, our kids media company, my two partners on that show, and we've got 5 shows, and I'm in one of them, Wow in the World, which we started with, but now there's a bunch of new ideas, and it will require me and Mindy, who are characters in Wow in the World, to be in this new show. And I'm like, do I have time in the world? But then I'm like, I really want to do this. It's going to be so fun. We want to do like a kids science fair show.
Oh, wow.
It's like an update of a science fair, and kids come on with an invention. Anyway, that's a different story. Let me say thank you to you first. Hrishi Hirway, thank you so much for joining us, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's Guy, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And for the audio version, just open up your favorite podcast app, search for The Great Creators, and tap follow.